leaking top insider stock trades every day until they stop us. We're looking at the top insider trades from last week, September 1st through the 5th. Football season is upon us, the NFL is starting, but the Colts suck, so not very interesting for me. However, we do have plenty of interesting insider trades. Before we look at the charts, let's start with a big winner from last week. Or I guess the trade was from 2 weeks ago, but it went way up last. The company is Syntex Technology, and we saw all these insiders buying on the we found them on the 28th. It was filed on the 27th of August. And we had seen that there had been a bunch of insider trades since April. And if you look way back over the time frame, one, you'll notice the stock is down at 98% or something wild. So terrible company. But there had been no other insider purchases during this drop. Well, there's just one random one back here. But since this huge drop over the last 2 years, no other insider purchases until April. And then all of a sudden we saw this huge insider purchase come in last week, which was these 4 insiders buying the stock. And they're buying the stock in size, as you can see, increasing holdings by 350%, 72%. This one was a little earlier at 200%. But huge gains, huge purchase sizes there. And then you'll now see that this stock had started to creep up and it cleared over 530. And when we shared this back on the 28th, the stock was trading somewhere in this like 380 range when we posted the video, 390, something like that. But look, we're at 562 now, so you can do some quick math. Like 562 over 380, something like 48% returns in just 5 days. And the reason why they had those returns was because they announced a big landmark study here where basically, something they were testing had positive results. So we saw a bunch of insiders buying the stock literally 5 days before they released a landmark, quote unquote, landmark study, and the stock went way up. These are the type of insider trades we're trying to find, right? You'll remember 90% totally useless. You have to find these unusual ones where they're making big trades. They haven't bought the stock in years and they're suddenly buying. Things like that is where you can really find some of the winners. This trade was shared in the email. It was shared in the video on August 28th, like I mentioned. So we found it. We shared it all over. It worked out pretty well. So now let's just get into this week's trades. Let's start with the overall buys and sells here, just looking at the charts that we have. Now, this week was a little shorter, obviously, with Labor Day. So the absolute numbers are going to be a little lower, but we can see, a pretty low week of purchases overall. The last couple of days of sales actually very high, a lot of sales, but very few purchases, which of course means that over the week, the percent of insider trades that were buys were also quite low. And overall for the week, very low at just 11% of total trades were buys, which well below the median at, 21-ish%. And this is typically, you only see it come down this low during earnings season, which would be, earnings are in basically January, April, July, and October. So as you can see, if you look at any of these small charts small bars, you'll see it's mostly in one of those months for the most part. So seeing this low of insider purchasing outside of earnings season, and the reason it's low during earnings season is because insiders are in blackout periods and they can't, make discretionary purchases, but they can leave on their 10b5-1 plans if those are already scheduled ahead of time. So definitely concerning. I mean, we'll see how the next couple of weeks go, but, also some concerning jobs reports data coming out this week. So we'll see how it shapes up, but definitely a more bearish week of insider trading for sure. So now let's head over to CEOWatcher.com. We're going to look at, since September 1st. I like to look at the longer term returns. As you know, we'll do bullish only because we're going to start with purchases and we will sort by the transaction value. Now let's see what we have. So Resideo Technologies, this is one we have seen for quite a while now. Because CD&R Channel Holdings has been buying up the stock. They made a huge purchase here, which this was another trade that we called out because this happened right before earnings. Earnings was on this date, somewhere around August 5th or 6th. They made this purchase on July 25th, just a couple days before, or a couple weeks before earnings. And the stock was up, 6% or whatever it was between those 2 days. But then CD&R Channel Holdings continued buying. And as we can see here, they bought again on the 19th, the 21st, the 26th, and they just bought again on the 4th. But then joining them on the purchase was this Andrew guy who is also a director who then bought $1 million of the stock for the first time in quite a while here. And if we look over at Andrew's historic purchasing of Resideo Technologies, he times it very, very well. Down here back at the end of 2019, he bought under $10, bought again under $10 in 2020, in the middle of 2020, and then the stock was over $30 there by mid-2021. So, tripled from both of those. And then again, at the beginning of this year, he bought while the stock was below 20 or right around 20 or below 20. now up to 35. So he's almost up 100% again on those, or, well over 70-ish% on those. So now making another purchase combined with the fact that this is a building stock in the housing sector, and we've had the Trump administration come out and talking about, maybe the need to subsidize or not necessarily subsidize, but do something to kind of improve what's going on in the housing sector, makes it an interesting thematic play. Plus the insider buying, I think, certainly makes this quite interesting. Moving on, we've got DiaMedica Therapeutics here, the 10% owner. This guy is buying the stock. Not much other insider buying at the company. Historically, whoever bought here, which would be this John Stahlberg guy, the same person who just bought right now, and I guess the Thomas von Koch or whatever, who also then just bought, a month and a half ago, back at this point. They both timed this purchase really good, and then whoever bought back here, somebody else also timed it well. So history of pretty good timing on insider purchases here. Also in terms of size, pretty sizable. We've got, let's just click into this Jan guy. We can see that he's increasing his holdings from, somewhere about 5.2 million before this trade up to now 7.7, so 50% plus holdings increase there. These trades are also his largest trades ever by quite a bit. He's purchased over $11 million of the stock now in the last 6 weeks or so, and had only purchased $3 million before. As we mentioned previously, fantastic timing with that previous purchase. So we'll see if he's got more fantastic timing here. I think this is another interesting one. Obviously, biotech is an industry not many people like to play in, and a lot of people like to avoid, but multiple insiders buying, they timed their previous purchases pretty well. I think that's certainly notable. Shattuck Labs, this was one that the stock's already popped like a ton, I'm pretty sure, yeah. So this one, I think if we look, let's see what price exactly they got in at. Looks like they had a bunch of warrants, and then they also purchased some common stock at 86 cents. So I don't, do they tell us why they got it so cheap? Not exactly. So they purchased a bunch of warrants. They purchased the common stock. Click into Shattuck Labs here. Let's see what the stock is at now. $1.51, so already up almost 100%. And they were buying, at below market prices, it seems like. So, yeah, unfortunately, congratulations to the insiders. Worked out pretty well. But for us, not one I don't think we could do much in, unless you think, obviously, it is a biotech. Who knows how much the stock could run? But for me, probably not. Most of the run is probably done, in my opinion. Or at least, even if the run's not done, I think the risk reward is much worse now than it might have been before. Gold and precious metals, Saba Capital buying up a bunch of the stock. They've made 1,300 previous purchases, so it's hard, total across all the stocks they own. Hard to gain much insight from those, but we can see the only previous time that they purchased ASA Gold was back here at the end of 2023, and they timed that very well because the stock was trading way down at $15-ish. It's at 38 now, so nobody's complaining about that. Basically straight up into the right since then, and now continuing to buy up here is pretty interesting. But obviously, the dollar losing some value, and then maybe some concerns about the economy and the stock market. Quite a few people have gone to gold, obviously, as the price is way up. Could be interesting if gold is something you're paying attention to. What else do we have here? This is part of a purchase agreement, so I'm just going to skip over that for now. Biodesix, director and 10% owner buying the stock. Not a great history of buying, though, to be fair, these two purchases are much larger than those back there, and the stock is down quite a bit. But let's see, historically, bought all the time. Timing hasn't been particularly great, so, not one that I'm really interested in there. We already looked at this Andrew guy from Residio. Freedom Holdings, looks like it's going to be this guy's first ever purchase. $1 million, an officer, a capital, some sort of capital bank style financial stock. In terms of, previous trading, timing seems to be okay, actually. So it doesn't look like it's his first ever purchase. So I wonder if the previous purchases were previous one purchase. It just hasn't been long enough now, but the stock's already up 21% since he made that purchase. So that was certainly a more interesting purchase, especially when you look back at his sales having worked out pretty well over the short term, I guess. Over the long term, it looks like maybe the stock came back up on him. This is at the beginning. He basically, if you look at just 2025, the stock was, he sold at the beginning of the year, the stock fell a little bit, came back up, and he basically bought the dip down there and is buying the stock again. So I think, not a ton going on here. Let's see if anybody else was buying the stock. Maybe that would give us a little more confidence. Looks like he's the only one, really. And you've got somebody else selling the stock too, which in that case, this guy's selling history doesn't appear to be very good, just based on his returns. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, he's sold right here on the way up, and the stock's obviously up quite a bit more since then. Person buying, I would say, has more signal than the person selling in this case, but we're seeing multiple insiders selling the stock, which, always kind of puts a damper. It just makes it hard to read what exactly is going on when you have insiders both buying and selling the stock. Let's see what else we have here. A massive holding increase at Huntington Ingalls. Let's take a look at that. So we'll jump into, this guy's first time ever, a director, first time ever buying the stock. Kind of interesting, to see them buying the stock after it's already gone up 40% in the last 6 months. I mean, a 3,000% holdings increase. Let's see if this is actually, based on what we know, he only owned 110 before, and then he picked up 3,500. So is that, yeah. So I guess the 3,000% increase in holdings is accurate according to the, there's no like unvested options or anything hiding, at least in the Form 4. We can take a look at his returns at the previous company where I'm guessing CEO at this company, purchased right before a stock jump here. Only about 10% returns before the stock started to dwindle off there. Attempted to purchase on this dip, but back in COVID, but the stock kept dipping. So I don't know, this guy I don't know if he really has he doesn't seem to have the best history of returns. I think it's notable that he's increasing his holdings so much. But again, it's his first time purchasing. There could be requirements that directors own a certain amount of the stock, and that might be why he needed to pick up $1 million worth. You also have a bunch of selling back here, which again, insiders selling and buying around the same time kind of hides any signal there. So I don't know if there's much there. I'm just gonna skip over Shenandoah. That this is just a company. They buy a ton of stock. It's hard to get any signal from them. Granted, it looks like most of their buying has been in the last few months, so it's certainly a much longer term play here if you wanted to look at a telecommunications company, but hard to glean much signal from that trade specifically. Triple Point Ventures, we've talked quite a bit about. This is a very easy one to see why this is bullish. All this insider purchasing with very little historic insider purchasing. We get some one-offs with insiders buying the dips, attempting to buy stock dips here. But this is by far, if you just look down at the quarters down here, $7.7 million of purchasing across 12 purchases from 2 insiders. And those 2 insiders are the CEO and CIO. And then 7.7 million versus 250K being the next highest amount of purchases. What is that? 35 times, 30 times something more buying going on. Certainly interesting. I think that's probably most of the most interesting stuff here. Avidia Bancorp, this is one that we've looked at a few times. Tons of insiders buying the stock since the stock IPO'd, which it just IPO'd at the beginning of August. We've now had 8 insiders buy the stock 23 times. $2.28 million. There's no history here for any of these insiders or for this company, so hard to know how they would have timed their trades in the past, but interesting to note that a bunch of them are buying, right after the IPO here. And we've got more insider buying at Cody, buying the stock here. This is a lot of people are kind of staying away from this stock because they do have some fraud investigations going on right now, but the chief legal officer is buying the stock, and the chief legal officer would probably have a pretty good idea how those fraud investigations are going, which I think could be a signal that maybe they're not too worried about it. The stock's been hammered, just poor results. They had really poor earnings that crashed the stock, and then obviously some of this lawsuit stuff. But you've got a handful of insiders. You got 4 different insiders buying the dip here, buying what looks like $1.4-ish million of the stock, with no insider purchasing for a very long time. They didn't time these particularly well back here, but over the last it's been almost 2 years since they purchased the stock before. So I think if you're interested in playing in those trickier potential turnarounds, lawsuits, situations, I think that's an interesting one to look at. Now let's flip over to sale. There has been a ton of selling this week. As we mentioned, very high ratio of selling to buying. A lot of it is 10b5-1 plan sales. We've got a bunch more selling at CoreWeave. These are now executives joining in on the selling after the IPO lockup. So basically the IPO lockup expired, and insiders have now sold almost $1 billion of the stock after that lockup. So we'll see how much the selling continues there, but all related to the post-IPO lockup. Satya Nadella, not marked as a 10b5-1, but he just sells his performance bonus every time he gets it. Not much signal there. CoreWeave, 10b5-1 stuff, 10b5-1. I'm just gonna kind of skip over. There has been more, Nvidia's had quite a bit of selling. Not all 10b5-1 either. Jensen's is 10b5-1 selling, but a handful of other insiders insiders have been selling just discretionary, no 10b5-1 plans. I don't know. I don't think it's terribly much of a signal. There's not a ton of history of insiders timing the sales pretty good, which kind of makes sense because the stock has been going up for quite a while, up 250% in the last 2 years. It'd be hard to time sales properly in there, so I don't know if there's really much signal there. A bunch more of 10b5-1 selling. Looks like we've got a purchase agreement here, which isn't as interesting. The Liquidia selling, a pretty popular stock, which again, always tough to try to time popular stocks, especially popular stocks with high momentum, as this one has a ton of positive momentum. But mostly 10b5-1 in tax sales. But the only interesting one here is Paul Manning's sale. A director made over 30 previous trades before, 34 previous trades, 35 total. Every single previous trade has been a purchase, all purchases. This one, first one ever, that's a sale. Also almost by far the largest trade ever. It is the largest trade ever. The only one that's even remotely close was this purchase of Taysha Gene Therapies, which worked out very well because the stock is now up 78% since he bought it almost 2 years ago now. Always purchasing, first time selling, and it's a pretty big one at $19 million. I think that is notable after the stock's up 85% in the last 6 months, 200% in the last year. Again, trying to time sales or, God forbid, shorting these high momentum, very popular stocks is just brutal to try to get right. But I think noticing the insider selling can tell you where the insiders are at least interested in selling. And if you start to see momentum turn around and die off, it could be an interesting place to look. Medpace, this one always cracks me up because I believe this is the CEO selling the stock here. And they crushed earnings and went up 50%. And the CEO is super bullish on the earnings call, and then he turns around and dumps $20 million of the stock immediately after. And then now he just sold another $18 million right after. So he seems pretty okay, getting rid of the stock in these high 400s. But he doesn't have a good enough history for me to really say if this is a high signal sale. I don't know if it is, but it's just notable that huge stock pop and then just dumping the stock. Might just be taking some profits there, but got some Jeff guy here, director at Encino. As far as previous sales timings, it looks like his returns are okay-ish. Not a great win rate, not particularly great returns. They get worse as time goes on. Just pretty quickly, to me, this one's not really interesting enough to dive any deeper into. Best Buy, they don't tell us who it is. It's probably an officer of some sort, an executive of some sort that it'll be in the file if we really wanted to look. But previous selling doesn't look particularly good to me, so I don't know. And he made larger sales before, and they didn't go well, so no real reason to believe why maybe this one would. We don't normally look at 10b5-1 sales, but this one is semi-interesting just because of the size of the sale. So one thing that we noticed historically, 10b5-1 plans, insiders can control, if they decide to sell the stock or if they decide to cut off the 10b5-1 and end it early, or maybe they just decide not to sell at all on the 10b5-1, or they could choose to all of a sudden suddenly increase the size of the sales they are making on the 10b5-1, and that's what we see here. Basically 10xing, 5xing, something like that, 10xing the size of his sales here after the stock goes up 70% in the last 3 months. You can see with the red bars, he was always making sales of under $1 million, somewhere in that like 700 to 900 range. Maybe with the stock price going up, he was just selling a set number of shares, which I guess we could just go look at. Let's see what number of shares he was selling before. So you can see he was selling, 30,000-ish, 24,000, 50,000. But we have this huge jump up to 245,000, which is a solid almost 10x increase in size of the sale. Just historically speaking, that tends to correlate with lower returns when they suddenly increase the amount of stock that they're selling on the 10b5-1 plan. Combine it with the fact that they're up 70% in the last month, and that's notable. The only thing that kind of is a drawback here is he has one time before made an even bigger sale, $188 million, which is far and away his biggest sale ever, and the stock just kept going up after doing that. So that the timing of that one was horrible, which is why his sell returns are terrible. Historically, his timing hasn't been great, but the fact that he just massively increased his sale here is kind of interesting. And moving on, lots of 10b5-1 sales. We're just kind of skipping over most of the 10b5-1. Cipher Mining, another super popular stock. Very hard to try to time these, but it is notable. This is the first time ever this 10% owner has decided to sell stock, and they are selling this rip here with the stock up 156% in the last year and over 100% in the last 3 months. And they look to be selling the stock, up above $6, $7. But Again, wildly hard to try to time these, but this insider is starting to get rid of some of the stock here. And you can see they've sold, you'll see them pop up a few times because they've sold a few times. Let's see, let's just look at one more maybe interesting one here to finish this out. Circle's another one where the IPO lockup happened and insiders were selling. An IPO that didn't go very well in that case. Carvana, another one, the insiders have been selling forever. It's not a great short-term signal, as you know, they tend to be very early to the sales. Like the insiders are getting out of this stock as quickly as they can. And we did just have a few it's always the CEO, who's this Garcia III, and the CEO's dad, who's this Ernest Garcia II. They are always selling, but just this week we did see a couple non-CEOs start to sell the stock, like the COO here is selling the stock, and they had a couple other executives that started selling too. So notable that a few other executives are starting to hop in on the selling. Here's a good one. The CEO at Frontier Group, a good one to end on. The CEO at Frontier Group, the stock is up 50% in the last month, which is kind of wild for an airline. But 50% in the last month, and then suddenly we see this red bar, huge sale going on. The only other time we saw some big old red bars was back here in the beginning of 2025, and the stock went from $9 down to $3. So pretty good timing. Like, shout out everybody that sold the stock then. If we look back even further, you can see a little bit of a red bar here, which was, again, good timing. This red bar back here, not good timing. Overall, though, I would say the insiders have timed the downturns pretty well here. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't continue, or I guess I would be surprised if we don't continue to see selling. I wouldn't be surprised if we do continue to see some selling here. As you see back here, they started selling for about 2 months here. They were selling over the 2-month period. It really picked up here at the top of the stock. Here we've only been selling for a few days, but we've got the CEO selling with killer previous returns, which, you know, his returns are that good because he was part of the cohort selling back here. We also have, let's see who else we have here. All of these insiders have good returns. The executive vice president of legal, director, and the SVP of human resources, and we've got another one, the 5th person, the chief commercial officer. All with good returns, except for the chief commercial officer who hasn't sold before. All with good returns. Stock up 50% for an airline's kind of bonkers. Definitely an interesting play to me, and definitely bearish insider activity there. So don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find all the top insider trades at CEOWatcher.com, and I'll see you next time.